The war in Ukraine, a conflict that erupted with renewed intensity in early 2022, continues to cast a long and devastating shadow across Eastern Europe. This is not merely a battle over territory or political ideologies, it is a profound human tragedy, unfolding daily with consequences that will resonate for generations. The involved parties, primarily the Russian Federation and Ukraine, are locked in a brutal struggle that spares no one. The fighting has its roots in earlier aggressions but escalated into a full-scale invasion, fundamentally altering the security landscape of the continent and unleashing a torrent of suffering upon the Ukrainian people. The world watches, and the human cost continues to mount with each passing day, a grim testament to the devastating power of modern warfare. The conflict's timeline is marked by relentless offensives, counter-offensives, and a persistent, grinding attrition that consumes lives and resources. What began with swift incursions has evolved into a complex, multi-front war characterized by artillery duels, missile strikes, and drone warfare. The front lines shift, sometimes slowly, sometimes with alarming speed, but beneath these strategic movements lies the constant reality of human suffering. Cities and towns, once vibrant communities, have become battlegrounds. The names of places like Kharkiv, Sumy, Donetsk, and Kherson are now synonymous not just with geographic locations, but with immense human pain, resilience, and the stark realities of a nation fighting for its survival against a larger aggressor. The international dimension of the war adds layers of complexity. Global powers are involved through military aid, economic sanctions, and diplomatic efforts, yet a definitive resolution remains elusive. Peace talks, such as those anticipated in Istanbul around June 2, 2025, carry a heavy weight of expectation, but also deep skepticism, particularly from the Ukrainian side, given Russia's uncompromising stance and continued territorial ambitions. Russian officials have openly stated their preparedness to fight indefinitely unless Ukraine capitulates to their terms that often include the cessation of Western military support and the acceptance of territorial losses far beyond the initially annexed regions, hinting at designs on cities like Odessa and Mykolaiv. This essay seeks to delve into the heart of this conflict, its human cost. Beyond the geopolitical analyses and military strategies, the truest measure of this war is found in the lives irrevocably altered, the men, women, and children caught in the crossfire, the communities torn apart, and the basic fabric of society shredded. It is an examination of the humanitarian crisis that has unfurled, a crisis demanding not only attention but urgent, sustained action. The focus remains steadfastly on the individuals whose existence has been upended, whose futures have been darkened, and whose daily lives have become a testament to the enduring, terrible price of war. The most immediate and irreversible consequence of the Russia-Ukraine war is the staggering loss of civilian life. Each day adds new names to a list already too long, a somber accounting of individuals who sought only to live in peace. Men, women, and children are indiscriminately caught in the maelstrom of violence, their deaths often sudden and brutal. Russian shelling in Kherson, for instance, recently claimed the life of a man, a single statistic that represents an entire world of lost potential, grief for loved ones, and a community diminished. These are not abstract numbers, they are fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters whose absence leaves an unfillable void. The war does not distinguish between combatant and non-combatant when missiles fall and shells explode. The targeting of civilian areas, whether deliberate or a consequence of indiscriminate attacks, has become a horrifying hallmark of this conflict. Residential neighborhoods, markets, and transportation hubs have all been struck, transforming ordinary spaces into scenes of carnage. Reports from various regions, including Zaporizhia, consistently highlight the vulnerability of those simply trying to go about their daily routines. The recent killing of a child in Dolinka, Zaporizhia region, alongside the wounding of another person, underscores the particular cruelty of a war that does not spare even the most innocent. Such incidents send ripples of fear throughout communities, making every moment outside the relative safety of a shelter a gamble. The violence is not confined to one side of the contested borders, though the scale of civilian suffering within Ukraine is overwhelmingly larger. Reports from Bryansk, Russia, detailed 7 fatalities and 30 injuries due to a train derailment and bridge collapse attributed by Russian authorities to illegal interference. While Ukraine has not commented, such events illustrate how the tendrils of conflict can spread, causing civilian casualties even within the aggressor nation, further complicating the narrative of victimhood and responsibility. However, the systematic and widespread nature of attacks on Ukrainian civilian populations remains a central and defining feature of the humanitarian crisis, painting a grim picture of daily existence. The sheer frequency of these attacks creates an atmosphere of pervasive dread. For the people living in contested zones or areas within range of Russian artillery and missiles, life becomes a constant state of alert. Air raid sirens are a common sound, forcing families to repeatedly seek refuge in basements or makeshift shelters. The psychological toll of this unrelenting threat is immense, eroding mental well-being and leaving deep scars on the collective psyche of the nation. The daily ledger of loss is not just counted in fatalities, but also in the countless injuries, both physical and psychological, that will affect survivors for years to come. Among the most heartbreaking victims of the Russia-Ukraine war are the children. Their innocence is shattered, their childhood stolen, replaced by fear, loss, and trauma. The recent death of a child in a Russian attack on Dolinka, Zaporizhia region, is a stark reminder that the youngest are directly in harm's way. These are not isolated incidents. Countless children have been killed or injured since the conflict's escalation. They witness horrors no child should ever see: the destruction of their homes, the injury or death of family members, and the constant terror of bombardment. The psychological impact of such experiences is profound and long-lasting, shaping a generation that will carry the unseen wounds of war. The disruption to education is another severe consequence for Ukrainian children. Schools have been damaged or destroyed or repurposed as shelters or military facilities. Many children have been forced to flee their homes, becoming internally displaced or refugees in neighboring countries, further interrupting their learning. Online education attempts to bridge the gap, but it is no substitute for a stable, safe learning environment and the social interaction crucial for development. The lack of consistent schooling not only hampers academic progress but also deprives children of a sense of normalcy and routine, which is vital during times of crisis. The future of an entire generation's education is at stake. Beyond physical harm and educational disruption, children suffer from the pervasive anxiety that blankets war-torn regions. The constant threat of attacks, the sound of sirens, and the sight of military hardware become a grim backdrop to their daily lives. Many exhibit symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, including nightmares, anxiety, and behavioral changes. Access to mental health support is limited, especially in active conflict zones, leaving many young minds to grapple with their trauma alone. The war is creating deep emotional scars that will require significant support and time to heal, if healing is ever fully possible for some. The international community has repeatedly condemned the impact of the war on children, yet the tragic reality persists. They are caught in a conflict they did not create, suffering disproportionately from its consequences. The loss of a parent, a sibling, or a friend, the displacement from familiar surroundings, and the daily exposure to violence fundamentally alter their worldview. Protecting children in conflict zones, providing them with aid, education, and psychosocial support must be a paramount concern. Their future, and indeed the future stability of the region, depends on the care and attention they receive today amidst the ruins of war. The widespread destruction of residential buildings is a defining feature of the human impact of the Russia-Ukraine war. Bombs and missiles have relentlessly rained down on cities, towns, and villages, reducing countless homes to smoldering ruins. Apartment blocks, once filled with families and the hum of daily life, now stand as hollowed-out shells, their facades scarred by explosions, their interiors exposed to the elements. This is not merely the loss of property, it is the obliteration of personal histories, the shattering of family sanctuaries, and the forced displacement of entire communities. Each collapsed building represents a multitude of individual tragedies, a testament to the indiscriminate nature of modern aerial bombardment. The impact of such destruction extends far beyond the immediate physical damage. For those who survive an attack on their home, the experience is deeply traumatizing. They may lose all their possessions, cherished mementos, and the sense of security that a home provides. Many are left with nothing but the clothes on their backs, forced to seek shelter with relatives, in crowded displacement centers, or even in damaged structures, exposed to further danger. The psychological toll of witnessing one's home, the center of one's life, violently destroyed is immense, contributing to the pervasive anxiety and despair that grips affected populations. Recent attacks, such as the Russian missile and drone strikes on the nights of May 29th to 30th and May 30th to 31st, 2025, specifically hit civilian infrastructure, which inherently includes residential areas in densely populated urban centers like Kharkiv. These strikes are not isolated incidents but part of a sustained campaign that seems to disregard civilian lives and property. The sheer scale of destruction means that rebuilding will be a monumental task, requiring vast resources and many years, long after the fighting eventually ceases. For now, the focus remains on survival, on finding temporary shelter, and on coping with the immediate aftermath of each new wave of destruction. The collapse of buildings also poses significant secondary dangers. Rescue efforts are perilous, with emergency workers risking their lives to pull survivors from the rubble. Unexploded ordnance can remain hidden within the debris, posing a long-term threat. The destruction of housing contributes directly to the internal displacement crisis, as millions are forced to abandon their hometowns in search of safety elsewhere in Ukraine or in neighboring countries. The fundamental human need for shelter becomes a desperate daily struggle for an ever-increasing number of people, a stark illustration of the war's devastating reach into the most basic aspects of human existence. Section 5. The erosion of normalcy, daily life under siege. The fighting in Ukraine has profoundly altered the rhythm of everyday life, replacing routine and predictability with a constant state of uncertainty and fear. Simple activities that were once taken for granted, going to work or school, shopping for groceries, or meeting friends, have become fraught with danger or entirely impossible in many regions. The sound of air raid sirens is a frequent interruption, forcing people to scramble for cover, often multiple times a day. This perpetual state of alert frays nerves and disrupts any semblance of a normal existence. The war has insidiously woven itself into the fabric of daily life, making survival the primary occupation for many. Access to essential goods and services has been severely compromised. Supply chains are broken, shops struggle to stock shelves, and prices for basic necessities have often soared. In areas directly affected by fighting or those under occupation, the situation is even more dire, with reports of shortages of food, clean water, and medicine. People queue for hours for bread or a chance to withdraw cash if banks are even operational. The struggle to meet fundamental needs adds an immense burden to populations already grappling with the trauma of war, transforming daily existence into an exhausting battle for resources. The social fabric of communities is also under immense strain. Families are separated, with men often on the front lines, while women, children, and the elderly are displaced or living under constant threat. Social gatherings, cultural events, and community activities, the very things that bind people together, have largely ceased in the most affected areas. Fear and suspicion can take root, particularly in occupied territories or areas with shifting control. The collective trauma experienced by communities will take years, perhaps generations to heal, as trust and social cohesion have been deeply damaged by the conflict's brutal realities. Even in regions further from the front lines, the war's impact is palpable. The economy has suffered immensely, leading to job losses and financial insecurity for millions. The constant stream of news detailing casualties and destruction contributes to a nationwide sense of anxiety and grief. Young people see their futures curtailed, their dreams deferred. The effort to maintain a facade of normalcy in some cities belies the underlying tension and the sacrifices being made. The war's pervasive influence means that no aspect of Ukrainian life remains untouched by its shadow, as the struggle for national survival overshadows all other concerns. Section 6. Attacks on lifelines, civilian infrastructure as targets. A particularly alarming aspect of the Russia-Ukraine war is the systematic and repeated targeting of civilian infrastructure. This goes beyond the accidental damage incurred during combat. It often appears to be a deliberate strategy aimed at crippling Ukraine's ability to function and demoralizing its population. Power plants, water treatment facilities, heating systems, communication networks, and transportation infrastructure, such as railways and bridges, have all been subjected to missile and drone attacks. These strikes have devastating consequences for ordinary people, far removed from the front lines, by disrupting essential services crucial for survival, especially during harsh weather conditions. The Russian missile and drone strikes reported on the nights of May 29th to 30th and May 30th to 31st, 2025, specifically noted impacts on civilian infrastructure in multiple oblasts, including Kharkiv, Sumy, Cherkasy, and Donetsk. Such attacks plunge cities into darkness, cut off water supplies, and disrupt heating, making life unbearable for residents. Hospitals struggle to operate without consistent power, endangering patients. The inability to communicate due to damaged networks isolates communities and hampers emergency response efforts. These are not military targets in the traditional sense. They are the lifelines that sustain civilian populations, and their destruction constitutes a grave violation of the laws of war. The disruption of transportation infrastructure, like the reported train derailment and bridge collapse in Bryansk, Russia, though its cause is disputed, and attacks on Ukrainian rail lines, has multiple effects. It hinders the movement of humanitarian aid to those in need, complicates the evacuation of civilians from dangerous areas, and cripples economic activity by preventing the transport of goods. When bridges are destroyed or railway lines are targeted, it isolates communities and makes the delivery of essential supplies, including food and medicine, incredibly challenging. This strategy aims to create widespread hardship and break the will of the people. The long-term consequences of destroying civilian infrastructure are profound. Rebuilding these complex systems will require enormous investment and time, delaying the recovery of affected regions for years, if not decades. The immediate impact, however, is the creation of a humanitarian crisis where basic necessities like warmth, clean water, and electricity become luxuries. This deliberate targeting of lifelines is a cruel tactic that exacerbates the suffering of a civilian population already reeling from the direct violence of war, turning the struggle for daily existence into an even more arduous ordeal for millions of Ukrainians. Section 7. Recent tremors. The unfolding tragedy in real time. Late May, early June 2025. The period spanning late May to early June 2025 has brought no respite from the relentless human toll of the Russia-Ukraine war. Instead, it has delivered fresh waves of violence and suffering. On June 1st, the stark reality of the conflict's indiscriminate nature was highlighted by the death of a child and the wounding of another person in a Russian attack on Dolinka, Zaporizhia region. On the same day, a man was killed by Russian shelling in Kherson. These individual tragedies, occurring hundreds of kilometers apart, paint a picture of a widespread offensive that continues to claim civilian lives with harrowing regularity, demonstrating that no corner of the targeted regions is truly safe from the reach of Russian weaponry. The intensity of aerial bombardments has remained a grave concern. Russian forces launched a significant barrage of 109 drones and 5 missiles across Ukraine in a single recent reporting period, with Ukrainian air defenses managing to destroy 42 of the drones. While interception efforts save lives and infrastructure, the sheer volume of these attacks means that many inevitably get through. The nights of May 30th to 31st saw Russian missile and drone strikes hitting civilian infrastructure in Kharkiv, Sumy, Cherkasy, and Donetsk oblasts. This followed similar strikes on May 29th to 30th that targeted civilian infrastructure in Donetsk, Kharkiv, and Odessa oblasts, showcasing a persistent pattern of attacks designed to cripple essential services and terrorize the population. Military operations on the ground also continue to exact a heavy price from civilians caught in the crossfire or living in areas experiencing shifts in control. The evacuation order for 11 villages in the Sumy region, prompted by the reported presence of 50,000 Russian troops, signals an impending intensification of fighting and the certainty of further displacement and hardship for the residents of these communities. Russian forces have reportedly made advances and captured settlements like Vodolahi in the Sumy region and Novopil in Donetsk, bringing more Ukrainian citizens under occupation or forcing them to flee. Each advance means more homes abandoned, more lives disrupted, and more communities torn apart by the brutal mechanics of war. The ongoing military actions, as documented by organizations like the Institute for the Study of War, consistently affect civilians across the board: children, women, and men. The humanitarian crisis is not a static event but an evolving catastrophe, exacerbated by each new offensive, each destroyed building, and each life lost. The recent events underscore the urgent and ongoing need for humanitarian assistance and protection for civilians who are bearing the brunt of a conflict that shows no signs of abating, their daily existence defined by the ever-present threat of violence and loss as June 2025 begins. Section 8. Forced Journeys, Displacement, and the Search for Safety. One of the most significant human consequences of the Russia-Ukraine war is the massive displacement of people. Millions have been forced to flee their homes, seeking safety either in other parts of Ukraine or in neighboring countries. This internal and external displacement crisis is staggering in its scale, reminiscent of the largest refugee movements in Europe since World War II. Families are torn apart, communities are uprooted, and individuals are cast into an uncertain future, often with little more than they could carry. The decision to leave one's home, abandoning possessions, livelihoods, and familiar surroundings, is a traumatic one, born out of sheer desperation to escape the violence and destruction. The recent order for the evacuation of 11 villages in the Sumy region, due to a reported major Russian troop buildup, is a clear contemporary example of this ongoing process. Such evacuations, while necessary for safety, inflict immense hardship. People are forced to leave behind their properties, their farms, their established lives, with no certainty of when or if they will be able to return. They become reliant on humanitarian aid and the goodwill of host communities, facing challenges in finding adequate shelter, employment, and access to essential services like healthcare and education for their children. The psychological toll of displacement, including anxiety, depression, and a sense of loss, is profound. Internally displaced persons within Ukraine face numerous difficulties. Many live in temporary shelters, collective centers, or with host families, often in crowded conditions. Access to resources can be inconsistent, and the strain on host communities is considerable. For those who become refugees in other countries, the challenges include language barriers, navigating unfamiliar bureaucratic systems, and integrating into new societies, all while grappling with the trauma of war and separation from loved ones who may have stayed behind. The uncertainty about their future and the fate of their homeland weighs heavily on them. The sheer number of displaced individuals creates a long-term humanitarian challenge. Providing sustained support, including housing, food, healthcare, and psychosocial services, requires immense resources and international cooperation. Furthermore, the prospect of return is fraught with difficulties. Many return to find their homes destroyed or their communities uninhabitable due to ongoing conflict or contamination by unexploded ordnance. The war has not only driven people from their homes, but has also, in many cases, erased the very places they once called home, leaving a legacy of uprooted lives and a desperate search for security. Section 9. Conclusion. Confronting the humanitarian imperative. The war in Ukraine as of June 2025 continues to be a relentless assault on human life and dignity. The evidence is overwhelming. Civilians, including the most vulnerable among them, children, women, and the elderly, are bearing an unconscionable burden of suffering. From the child killed in Dolinka to the man shelled in Kherson, each casualty is a stark indictment of the conflict's brutality. The systematic destruction of homes, the targeting of critical civilian infrastructure in regions like Kharkiv, Sumy, and Donetsk, and the constant barrage of missiles and drones have transformed vast swaths of a sovereign nation into landscapes of despair and ruin, creating an ever-deepening humanitarian crisis. The daily lives of ordinary Ukrainians have been irrevocably shattered. The erosion of normalcy, the constant fear of attack, the struggle for basic necessities, and the trauma of displacement have become the grim realities for millions. The evacuation of villages in Sumy, the ongoing battles in numerous oblasts, and the persistent Russian territorial ambitions beyond already annexed regions signal that this suffering is far from over. The Kremlin's preparation for a prolonged conflict and its uncompromising stance ahead of potential peace talks in Istanbul offer little hope for an imminent cessation of hostilities on terms that respect Ukraine's sovereignty or alleviate the suffering of its people. The international community's response, while significant in terms of aid and sanctions, must be continually reassessed and strengthened to meet the escalating needs. Humanitarian aid is a lifeline, but it is not a solution in itself. There must be sustained pressure and innovative strategies to protect civilians, ensure accountability for war crimes, and create pathways toward a just and lasting peace. The focus must remain unequivocally on the human cost, ensuring that the stories of individual suffering are not lost amidst geopolitical calculations or military strategies. The sheer scale of the crisis demands a global response rooted in compassion and a commitment to international law. Ultimately, the human impact of the Russia-Ukraine war serves as a horrifying reminder of the true cost of armed conflict in the 21st century. It underscores the urgent need for mechanisms that can prevent such catastrophes, protect civilian populations during wartime, and hold perpetrators of atrocities accountable. As the war grinds on, the imperative to provide aid, advocate for the victims, and work tirelessly towards a resolution that prioritizes human life and dignity becomes ever more critical. The world cannot afford to become desensitized to the tragedy unfolding in Ukraine. The future of its people, and indeed the principles of international order, hang precariously in the balance.